Welcome to the NerdBrand Podcast. I'm your host this week, I guess, because I've been asked to. And this week we're talking about 52 from DC, the new 52. This week on the NerdBrand Podcast.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And see, that's when the music goes on.
That's when the music hits, yeah, and we go into it.
Yeah, and we go into it. So that's a little bit of a, like, we've got fans out there that remember us from 2017, but that's a little bit of a blast of the past.
We might.
Yeah. So, yes, welcome to the NerdBrand Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Jason, and here below me is Brandon Jones. Brandon Jones is one of the forefathers of the NerdBrand Podcast. He and I used to do this thing together we've been in it for about a year and a half or about a couple of years.
About a year and a half, yeah.
Yeah. So this is our 1 year episode. So with us, of course, is the hosts. We have Mitch and we have John. And so we're happy to, we're thrilled. Like, this is episode number 52 for us. So we thought that, as Brandon stated in the cold open, we talk about the new 52 in DC. So it's the new 52 and why branding. There's a lot that kind of happened with the new 52. So for some reason, it became very controversial. So I will read the opening here. And then Brandon, I'd love for you to plug yourself, your podcast, and talk about it, because I think it's a really, really great niche. But this episode of the NerdBrand Podcast, we're taking a trip back in time and inviting an old friend and fellow podcaster, Brandon Jones. Brandon is the creator and host of the podcast Animation Destination and has worked in marketing and design for over the last decade. So, Mr. Jones, tell the people who you are.
Hello. As I said, I'm Brandon Jones. I'm the host of the Animation Destination podcast. I also host the Video Destruct podcast with my friend Haas. He's the video game guy, but I sort of kind of guide his words through a coherent show in a few ways. But also the Animation Destination podcast. That's my passion project, where I talk about animation, anime, voice acting, all pretty much everything that encompasses animation. This past week's episode, we discussed Rick and Morty season 4, as Rick and Morty has been announced for season 5. So, wow. And there's, I think, 8 more seasons left to go with that show, apparently, with the show order. So plenty more content for that. So it's a weekly podcast, PG podcast, so it's family friendly. If you guys want to jump on and catch that. So.
Yep, we'll imply, if you're following NerdBrand on YouTube, we'll put the links to that in the description, so you can click on that below and visit that podcast, subscribe to him on the channels that he has, and then hopefully like and subscribe to this video, because we need those. We need that Vanity Earl, because we're so vain, and then I got to remember to make the right Vanity Earl, because John will get mad if I don't.
Just don't forget the N. NerdBrand.
Yeah, say NerdBrand Agency. Everything on social to follow us is at NerdBrand Agency. So think of a social network, that's our handle. We plan that out, right?
Except Clubhouse.
Except Clubhouse. Oh my gosh. That thing keeps coming up. John doesn't necessarily, can I say on the show, you don't like it, but it keeps coming up.
It's got its place.
Yeah.
People like it, and that's fine. I'm in the camp that doesn't. Maybe I just don't have the time to attend extra meetings.
That is true. I definitely, yeah. Like I kind of checked it out. Of course, you have to be invited by somebody that's already a member of Clubhouse, because they haven't completely rolled it out apparently yet, for you can just go in and sign up. This week has been, as of this recording, it's been a really rough week for social media anyways. I mean, Facebook and Instagram were down yesterday. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, half the population probably went to Twitter and the other half went to Pornhub.
Or both.
Well, it's like Google's taking away Google Ads data on broad match type stuff, and Facebook is now taking away analytics in some capacity. I didn't get that email, but you did, Jason. I've heard other people complaining about it.
Yeah, how are they, and it's not really in the podcast notes, so my bad, but it is fascinating how things have unraveled this week. As we were planning for this show, I got an email. Facebook's like, yeah, in June, Facebook analytics, bye-bye. And I'm like, but what about ads on Facebook? How do you know if they're working? Oh, wait, they probably never really did anyway, I guess.
They were like, hold my beer to Google. We'll just get rid of our whole ads platform.
Yeah, Google's like, we're going to get rid of the cookies. Facebook was like, watch this. Anyway, I guess that was an impromptu segment from John. We've kind of gone back and forth. Like, John typically does the brand bit on the show for those listening. But given the topic today and the things that we're going to talk about, it's pretty nerdy. So, and we don't shame John for not having, all the pieces to that. He's got a lot going on anyways. He gets a free pass. He's got like a toddler and a newborn. So, a little bit busy.
Watch too many movies.
Blame it on the kids.
Yeah, might as well.
Well, for the brand bit, it was for DC Comics and the new 52, and it's some say failing and things like that. So we're going to kind of weigh on that, Brandon. I know you're I'm sure you've got a pretty heavy opinion on the 52 now, all these years later, and how that went over.
Yeah,
yeah. So the mystery has been. This is from an excerpt from Screen Rant. The mystery has been teased already with Dr. Manhattan killing the Reverse Flash and the Justice League tracking Dr. Manhattan to the moon. But in Doomsday Clock #9, the story is finally told from Manhattan's point of view, revealing that the New 52 was his brainchild and his greatest failure. Needless to say, that's spoilers for those that care. But I love how when you're rebranding your franchise and all your characters, you blame it on a fictional character.
Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing, the New 52, because it was derivative of 52, which was the first one way back in the late 2000s, which is around my era of like loving DC basically. And 52 was a weekly comic that came out every week, and it sort of told an area of time, a year of time in between where the comics now began. They sort of relaunched all their titles, and that the titles happened 1 year later. And then you got caught up on everything that was going on in those titles through the 52, which was every week was a new comic. And that week was actually that week in the comic as well. So the Halloween issue was Halloween, and it was a really interesting idea, and kind of brought back weekly comics in general at the time. And they had like 5 of their best writers on it. They had Grant Morrison and Mark Waid, Cusick, and just everybody was writing on this one thing. And the editors at the time, Dan DiDio and all they hated it because they had no control over anything, because editors have to have control over everything. And I can understand the need for that. But so after the absolute success of 52, it was a great story. People loved it. I still have my trades and everything of it. It's a great story. They decided to follow that up with another weekly one called Countdown, which was an abject failure. It sucked. It was terrible. Everyone disliked it. And after a while, like, things sort of kind of settled into this 1 year later thing. And for some reason, Dan DiDio, the former editor-in-chief, he has since been fired from the position after New 52. So he has this obsession with people. They can't go with like a lax timeline, kind of how Marvel does. Like, Marvel will just be like, Tony Stark was in Korea, now he was in Afghanistan, and now, you know what I mean? Like, his origin kind of shifted as it went along, and they just sort of let that happen. They don't let you like, well, in the first issues you said he was in the Korean War. That no one cares, because people get it. They understand these are timeless characters that get pulled on. Well, Dan DiDio can't get that out of his head, so he has to reset the universe like every so often so people can understand what's going on. And it's stupid because we have Wikipedia. So, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So New 52 came along as a reset that basically, like Jeff Johns had the idea of having Dr. Manhattan, and it was going to be revealed like soon after that it was going to be Dr. Manhattan that did all this. But Doomsday Clock didn't come out till years after New 52, and even years after New 52 was undone by Rebirth. So Rebirth, another big recompassing of the DC universe, because New 52. So the idea was they're gonna have 52 new titles, and this is the New 52. Not a terrible idea. So they basically waxed all of their continuity. 52 new titles were now going to come out, right? All brand new titles, and with new origins, and they'd be some of the same. Obviously, Batman's parents were still killed. That's got to stay. The pearls still hit the floor of the alleyway because they have to. And I don't know why that has to be the shot every time, just because it happened one time. And
I know. Well,
it's so perfectly poetic.
It is. It's a very poetic scene, but they have to show it in every iteration of Batman, and it drives me insane.
It's canon.
It is. It's canon. It's very canon. So New 52 was basically the answer to this new thing where, so superheroes had only been around had been known for about 5 years. Batman had been in operation for about 7 to 10 years. They had this plan that was all set out that like Superman was just now becoming like known to the world. The Justice League had just formed. So the Justice League in the New 52 was, if you've seen the animated movie Justice League War, it's basically the adaptation of that first Justice League run by Jeff Johns from New 52. And it's basically all the heroes kind of meeting each other for the first time. And it's an interesting concept. And a lot of people enjoyed that run, that Jeff Johns run that he had. Some of the storylines were kind of big hits. The Snyder run, Scott Snyder run on Batman was the biggest, I think, because that brought in the Court of Owls, and like all these. It was, and it like had all these like seedy underbelly of Gotham, and like how Gotham was like this. It kind of brought back that whole Gotham being a character thing, where it's like all these things underneath Gotham, and that was interesting. Scott Snyder has since lost his mind and just gone on to make more things like that,
like Bat Rabbit.
Yeah, like just everything from metal. Just that whole thing, like. I don't understand Scott Snyder's mentality when it comes to things. It's literally just like, so like, what if everything was Batman? Okay, like I guess we could do that, but it doesn't make it good. So back to New 52, when Snyder was the golden child. A lot of the new titles were relaunches, and a lot of them sort of, they had a good tone to them. It was working pretty well when it first came out, and I think they were having like record sales at the time when it first happened. So it was viewed as a huge success initially as it launched, because it's 52 number ones. And if anybody knows anything about the comic book industry, number ones sell. Doesn't matter if they're good. Ever since Superman or Action Comics number one sold for $1 million, rebooting your storyline with a number one will just get you an instant, oh, that's 50K sales right there. It doesn't matter if it's a low end character or whatever.
Yeah,
it's a number one.
That's a really good observation, because it's like in our world, like in the business world, for those that listen that are like, well, how does this relate to like my brand and business? And I mean, we're talking about a product that was launched, that initially when launched made a bunch of money, but as over time, not so much. I think a lot of people experience that, especially over the last year. Now that, D2C stuff and e-com has been popular, I've heard a lot of stories like, I launched my store and I made a ton of sales, and then the next month I did $100, and it's like, well, product development.
Initially, that's what, if everybody remembers the early 90s, after, comics had exploded in the mid and late 80s, and that's when the collectors people that weren't comic book fans, but the investors and the collectors purely for monetary purposes were getting into the game and buying up all these number ones and all these, that's when all the, alternate covers started, was all the rage, and these really expensive papers they were printing things on, and, lenticular covers, all kinds of crazy stuff. But anyway, investors and speculators got involved. So the comic book company started printing millions of copies of everything. Well, needless to say, that's not sustainable. The bottom fell out. Comic book companies almost went broke. Marvel declared bankruptcy. It's almost like that, but it's to what we were talking about before that. And that's just simply the fact that people buy number one issues because of the perceived value that every number one is going to end up being worth $1 million in 30 years.
Right. Yeah.
Not in the quantities that they print things these days. Not anymore. But anyway, sorry about the digression.
No worries. I mean, it's a perfect digression because it really did. Like it killed the industry. Like all those lenticular covers, those chromium covers, the collectible covers with each character on it. It just like there was so much product just sitting on the shelf that nobody wanted, and New 52 was a little bit smarter than that. A little bit. They got worse as it went along, but. Well, it was interesting because I think it was right before that DC started to do their cover months, which were interesting. They did one where like each cover was like we could probably talk a whole other topic about this. They had 1 month that was all like movie poster covers, where like all the Batgirl like was on her motorcycle. It looked like the cover. It looked like the poster for Prince's movie, Color Purple. What is that movie?
Purple Rain.
Purple Rain. Color purple. Completely wrong. But yeah, Purple Rain. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
It's completely different film.
Right, but like Batgirl's like sitting next to her the Bat Cycle, and she looks like Morris Day, like on the cover of that, and stuff like that. And they did that for each one, and it was a cool little gimmick. It was like 1 month we're going to release these covers and everything, and it was a huge hit. So then they did the Halloween like a month later. A month later they had the Halloween stuff, or a couple months later. Because it was in the summer, they did the posters and then Halloween covers, and it was like all different Halloween stuff, and it was that was pretty, and it started to work. But then I started to notice they just started doing it all the time, and I'm like, this is what killed the industry, guys. Let's not do that.
Gimmicks.
It's not. Yeah, I got to be careful about it. And so far, it hasn't hurt it, but we have had a bunch of like collectible cover things that's been sort of keeping things alive for a lot of the comic industry in a few ways. But back to New 52, I guess, if you want me to keep going on like what this thing is, I guess.
It's kind of up. It's, we can kind of keep bouncing because I mean, honestly, we're talking about at the core, and it kind of feeds into like what we did years ago with the podcast. It's like, we're talking about a business. It's trying to they're trying to make money. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But the way they went about the marketing, the way they went about producing all of this, you guys kind of hit it on the head when you said there's so much product on the shelf. Yeah, you saturated your own market. You had
it's a flood the shelves mentality. Basically, we throw out as many titles as we can onto the shelf. Marvel started doing that later, but basically it just shoves things off the shelf. Like things that people really like to collect kind of die out. With New 52, one of my favorite titles, and I'm the only person that cared about this title, was Blackhawks. That's a callback to an old World War I comic back in the day, and they relaunched it with this G.I. Joe kind of mentality where like each person was a specialist, and you had like the Larry Hama style like character cards and stuff, and I was completely down with this title. Like I was like, this is awesome. It lasted 6 issues and was canceled. It was their lowest seller. So I'm the only one that cared. But it just sort of got ate up. That wasn't really like a bad decision. I thought what they presented was really well. Just no one else cared about it because I guess Blackhawks wasn't a big enough name to carry it. And obviously people were buying up Batman and Detective Comics because of all the Court of Owls stuff. But it started to show cracks very soon, this whole mentality, because initially it was a big boom and everybody was, it's a big success. But then it started to show the cracks within the planning stages.
This whole thing, like, to kind of get everybody kind of like, well, how does this go fit with branding and what you guys do? What we're talking about is like a dilution. I can't talk today. It's Friday. That's why. But they diluted the brand because it turned into this like big oak, it was this oak tree. You had Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, all these characters. These are the tenets of DC, like when they started
the foundation.
Yeah, they promoted the movies, right? They were like, here's a Superman, here's Wonder Woman, here's Batman. Everybody was like, yay, Zach, until they saw it. And then they were like, what? But I say that because it turned into a bush later because you got all this other stuff happening, and that's the danger with the multiverse stuff. I feel like is like you confuse the fan base on which one. I mean, they'll pick the one they want to follow and you can introduce new characters within a Batman storyline, but it's like they kind of got away from the oak tree, kind of like, here's the staples, here's what we are. And they tried the gimmicks and they just kept doing it because they just were paying attention to the money and not to the fan base and to the product.
Yeah. To expand on that point, it really was like that's really where it started to fall apart for me. I wasn't initially happy about it when it first happened because I don't like continuity I'm a continuity type guy. I don't like continuity being stricken. It doesn't do anything because like I read it happened. You don't have to get rid of that,
Right.
And initially like they got rid of two of my favorite characters, Cassandra Cain and Stephanie Brown. I loved their run in the early 2000s and they just said, oh, those don't exist anymore. Like it's initially, like straight up, like those characters are gone. They then listened to the fans and brought them back like a year later as different characters. But it's like when and that wasn't like a big deal to me because like obviously like there's other characters I enjoy, but when you present something as like it's the new 52, all that stuff you thought before, forget about it. And like people don't like to hear that when they think about a franchise. They don't like to think about like, oh, that thing that you enjoyed, it's no longer part of it.
And this is where I kind of want to I want to bring John into the focus. See, John's mind is a very tactical mind. That's why he's our chief marketing officer. And I know you're sitting there, John, going like, yeah, but all I hear is comics.
I hear audience, and I'm trying to. It's fascinating as an outsider. I'm very much an outsider to hear you guys talk in the details, and I'm like trying to piece together in my head why would DC operate this way? Why do any of these organizations operate this way? It's more questions that come to mind for me. It's like, do they get different writers, and those folks just have a different, perception and move on in different directions, or like Mitch was saying. You're trying to appease such different segments. They're all related, but you're trying to appease, the new folks, the original folks. You're also trying to appease the people who have, people who love Batman, people who love Superman. And at the same time, you're trying to get this crossbreeding of trying to get them all interested in all the other stuff that you're doing as a company, as DC's doing as a company. I mean, that to me, that's where my mind goes. I'm trying to figure out how do they manage all these different audience segments, because it's a brand with a ton of different audience segments.
Comics is a terribly complicated ecosystem. Whether it's DC, generally you've got DC and Marvel, which are the two big ones now, and those they're still at the top of the pile. But it's like you, to your point, Jonathan, it's a very complex ecosystem because you've got a segmented fan base. Then you've got the store owners and your distributors and your sales, your stores that are selling the product. You've got to keep them happy. Then never mind the whole distribution system, which now has been turned on its head because
we're going to talk about that just for decades.
I
have to. I have to talk about the distribution just a little bit because the money's at.
I mean, the only parallel I can think of with comics distribution in any other product is like the liquor industry, like beer distributor. It's kind of sort of like that, maybe, where you don't sell directly to the stores. You go,
right.
Your product goes out to a distributor who then parcels it out to different outlets and things like that. It's comics is a strange business with more layers than an onion.
Yeah, I mean, you like you said, John, you got all these audience segments, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's not any different than we just said with liquor. You've got you got people that like their bourbon, people that like their whiskey, people that like their beer, whatever, I mean, everybody's got their own taste. Like I was talking with Mitch the other day about, hey, you know what? Let's not that Nerd Brand's going to go out and we're all going to get smashed on the weekend. Though I don't know, man, after the last couple of years we've all had, I think it may not be a bad idea. But, actually sampling some of these bourbons that we talk about and hear about, because it's still a big market, and now you have sales of that happening online in some states. And so with comics, unlike probably liquor, right? There's not that many distributors, or there wasn't. There's really just one. And then pandemic happened. And then all of a sudden, things started changing up. I think when we talked with Brandon, we usually do a pre-interview for our podcast for our guests so that we can kind of get an idea of like where conversation's going to go. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. I still think we could do a damn good show. But at the end of the day, we got to talking about Penguin and Diamond Comics and what happened with Marvel. And because when a company like Marvel said, yeah, you know what, we're not going to have you distribute anymore, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, it was very irritating to watch the comics media explode when at the beginning of the pandemic, when DC was like, we have product we have to move. And Diamond decided they weren't going to distribute. They just decided they're not going to distribute or live up to the contract that they had. And in fact, we're not going to actually pay Marvel or DC for a couple of months. Like they just decided to do this. So DC fired the first, like that was the first shot against, against the industries. And then DC shot the first shot across the bow of Diamond and said, okay, well, we're moving to this, the people that do Midway, we're going to have them distribute our comics. You're no longer exclusive. So they cut them. And they got roasted by the comics media, the chumps at Bleeding Cool and all those fools. Like they rose. How dare they do this to Diamond Comics? And I'm sitting there reading, like, Diamond decided not to distribute and DC needed to move product. What were they supposed to do? Like just bow to them? No, like the exclusivity contract with Diamond is ridiculous anyway. It never should have lasted as long as it has. So they needed to move products so they didn't have to lay off, writers and artists and everything. Whereas Marvel just started cutting everything. It's like, drop your pens, don't do any, make nothing. We're not paying you to do anything right now because we're not putting product out. And DC got roasted for continuing thing. And now Marvel has come out and decided to say, okay, Diamond, we're going with Penguin, and you're not exclusive anymore. We'll still send some stuff out for you. And like the comics people, oh, good for Marvel. They stood up. And I'm just like, hold on. Like literally, like last year, you people were lambasting DC for killing the comic industry and making it hard for the comic store owner, and now Marvel's got this like big backing. It drove me crazy. I couldn't believe what I was watching.
That's what DC stands for.
Yeah,
drive you crazy.
Yeah, drive you crazy. Well, yeah, it's just that the direct market is now growing in a lot of ways too. A lot of creators, big creators. Scott Snyder, who we've mentioned earlier on this podcast, he started making starting a Kickstarter for a comic of his own design that's not based on any DC properties. Sean Gordon Murphy, who did the White Knight series, which was a big success recently in DC, he started his own Kickstarter. Like that Ethan Van Sciver left DC entirely years ago and started his own Cyber Frog empire, basically. Yeah, and it's been awesome. Like people have been enjoying that a lot. And so like the direct market is now growing for comics because all this stuff is crazy. So
I think you smell it, John. I think you're like, are you guys talking about D2C? Are you starting to get into e-com and get into that? Because yeah,
it is.
I'll shut up now because that's John's world.
Right, it's direct to customer. So
yeah. I mean, every other product is heading in that direction. Why wouldn't comics?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't comics?
Yeah.
John,
how's that impacting the distributor and the comic book store market? I mean, are they?
It's well, no, they're angry about it because, well, there's a lot of like the younger creators that have kind of been called up that get paid peanuts in a lot of ways. There's this new crew of like writers that are kind of coming up in DC and Marvel. And personally, I don't think they're that good. These writers, they don't match up to like Grant Morrison or Mark Waid or these old school guys that are just really, really good. And the cracks are starting to show with their work. They don't have Dark Knight Returns. They don't have any of these big momentous things that exist. And now you have people like the ones that do have successful things that like are a big price tag for people to take on, for companies to take on, like Sean Gordon Murphy, who did a big series for that. He decided, well, they're not going to pay me now because they don't have the money to. No one's buying comics right now. So I'm just going to make my own thing and sell directly to the customer with my own characters so that I don't have to rely on these people. Tom King was a big one. He was praised for his Vision comic book, and then he did Mr. Miracle, which was good up until the ending. But he kind of quickly became a meme to where everyone he writes is sad boy is sad. Everybody's sad. And that's literally every book that he writes. Just sad. Batman, he's a sad man.
Yeah.
And then they did Rebirth after that, and it retconned everything. And so, like you said, like what was all those new initiatives, all that new thing, all that planning gone.
When you sit down and commit to a strategy, or you make a strategy, like you got to stick to it. And for that brand, for DC as a brand and the individual sub brands of the characters and everything, they kept pivoting and deviating and making those changes without thinking about where that would lead or how far it steps away from the original purpose. And that's going to affect product sales. That's going to affect everything in the chain as you go down. And so it's one thing to develop a brand like what we do, but it's like another thing to do brand management. Like there's got to be somebody that has their hand on that. And again, we keep making the comparison with the Marvel Cinematic Universe versus DC, because it still plays out, believe it or not, 10 years to this day almost, that it's like they had a plan. They stuck to that plan in large parts to Feige. And, DC doesn't seem to have anybody really at the helm. I mean, they had Jeff Johns, but I mean, it just seems to be, doesn't really have as Mitch puts it sometimes, they're a big ship without either a rudder or North Star to guide them. And because of that, that's why we have kind of like in the cinematic realm and in the comics, the mess that we have. And unfortunately, it does translate into the animation as well. So the entire product is affected. And as of today, where is DC?
Yeah.
And where is DC as a brand, and that you guys know of, after what we witnessed in 2020 of things shutting down, like DC Universe?
Yeah.
Shutting down everything, going to HBO Max.
Right. It's a shame because DC Universe was an interesting thing. They had initial problems when they first came out. I gave them money for the first month because they were bringing back Young Justice, which was a animated series, a couple years ago, and they're bringing it back for season 3. So I was like, well, you're bringing back one of my favorite shows, so I'll throw you money for a year at least. And I did.
There's a huge advocacy right now for telling people go buy DVDs, buy Blu-rays, because for a multitude of reasons that I won't even go into here, stuff is disappearing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why you saw the rise. And this is a different podcast to talk about, probably IFTs, and all of that, like digital things that are verified to be the actual thing, basically. And is the shortest version of the way that I can explain that in the time allotted here. But I think that's why that has risen up like it has, because I too have purchased things online digitally, and to Brandon's fears, it's gone because that platform died.
And it's not like the end of the world, these things, like, because there's actually apparently you can't just delete things from existence anymore, because people now have things on their resume and they can't just go away. So there's actually laws against actually like the erasure of media, interestingly enough, because like people will actually put it on their like, hey, I worked on this thing. Well, that thing doesn't exist anymore. Well, okay. So, we have lost media from back in the day, but when something is actually licensed and put out, and it's like, and then there's certain shows that will kind of disappear because they're a tax write-off, and then they can't air ever again on a network television because like, we wrote that off in taxes, so we can't air it ever. That some of those things are coming back for streaming. Some shows are coming back into streaming that can't air on TV anymore because streaming has different rights, etc. So I'm not against streaming entirely. I just also want a physical thing of the thing that I enjoy, because I have it, and you can't take that away. You can't discern the right. You can stop selling it, but you can't take away the rights of the thing that I have.
There you go.
And it's mine now, and I can watch this whenever I want until the EMP goes off and cuts off all of our electricity. So, you know.
Hey man, this ain't Texas.
Right.
It's an experience thing too. It's like, you guys talked about the industry going to a D2C model. Well, at least I know you, Jason, and Mitch, you guys like to walk into the comic book store and have that experience. I can't say I frequent them, but I get it. For me, it's like walking into a music store and, the guitar shop. And it's like the tactile, that experience of being surrounded by 400 guitars on the walls, that's an experience in and of itself. And if that goes away, and it does. And when D2C starts to really take over, where does that leave the fan base? Where does that leave kind of the passion? Because a significant chunk of that audience, like you, Brandon, they want that physical thing. They want to hold it. They want to put it up on a wall. That's a big thing. That's going across every industry. The kind of the physical brick and mortar experience in a lot of cases is at least evolving, if not going away.
Everybody's itching to have that experience, to go out to the comic store, to go out to the music store. I mean, it's the tsunami's coming. Whether or not the brick and mortar places are prepared for it or not is yet to be determined. People are going to want to go back out and eat. I mean, as of this broadcast, like I'm talking like we're on, I don't know what's wrong with me. But anyway, as of April 9th of 2021, we know that in a month or more that people are going to want to have that feeling of they're already there, wanting to go outside and do things. I volunteer on a chamber board, and meeting in person has been a desire for a while, and we almost got there a couple months ago, but then we pulled back when another wave hit of COVID or so. And so now it's like, but it's getting, as more people get vaccinated, more of us want to now kind of like, okay, can we go out now? That's kind of the response that's happening. And businesses need, in light, and I know this kind of changes gears just a little bit, but in light of Facebook and in light of what's going on online, the way that you can communicate that your brand is still alive, still around, and open has to be considered at some point in your brand strategy, in the management of it, so that people know that they can physically access whatever it is you're selling, or physically access or meet you even. So, I mean, and this is kind of wrapping up the conversation, but I hope that it's been, it's in some way you can glean from this, and looking at us, I guess, not totally bashing DC, but looking at like, this isn't the best way to do it, to kind of dilute your product and to confuse your base to know whether or not if they want to get it or not. Like, what really just struck me a moment ago, Brandon, is when you said, yeah, you gave them money, but then now you're like, I don't really care. And that's a horrible thing for somebody to want to hear that's selling something.
Yeah.
Everything is an ad.
Everything is an ad. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and if you, I think if you don't hold to that principle, and it doesn't seem like DC has, it seems like they're, kind of what a lot of folks do with content marketing. It's quantity over quality in a lot of ways, and not considering that consistent customer experience and the brand experience. If you don't treat everything as an ad and some form of strategic, lens, then you're diluting your brand. You are by default. You're giving people a different experience that's not in line with what they're familiar with, what they expect. So I think that's, they took their eye off the ball, it sounds like.
Well, and it begs the other question, I think, especially in DC's case, because like I said, I'm going back and I'm trying to count, starting from the 80s, how many times DC relaunched their universe. One more thing on this, and I'll shut up.
Yeah.
You contrast that with what Marvel did, I guess, what the early 2000s with the Ultimates.
Yeah.
You got your regular continuity, your regular characters over here. We're going to do a limited line of books to basically take these characters and sort of modernize them, update them, bring them more into the current age, give it just tilt it a little bit more grown up.
Yeah.
Not to say brooding and dark and everything, which seems to be what DC hangs its hat on now for everything. It's like, why is everything like that?
Yeah, because like Brandon said, everybody's sad.
Yeah, exactly. But you try so they launched the Ultimate universe, which, by the way, I don't know if anybody noticed if you're in comics, but that probably did more to help inform the cinematic universe.
Yeah.
It's a nice blend of both the original and the Ultimate. Nick Fury, anyone?
Yeah.
Nick Fury is from the Ultimate line. He's not from the original Marvel continuity. Anyway, but if you're going to try that. It was limited. It was contained. It appeased a certain number of fans, and it ended up exploding, and people loved it. But it wasn't just like a wholesale retool, wholesale rebuild and destruction of everything that's come before.
And to that point, the only successful thing that came out of New 52 that's still running today is the Earth One offshoots, which is literally just that. It's the re-originizing of these characters, and it's like, oh, Batman, Earth One, and then it's just trade paperbacks of his origin, and then Superman, and then they did Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman's going nicely. It's the only thing that's lasted through the first initial thing of New 52, and that and Court of Owls. That's it. So yeah, and it's basically just the Ultimate Universe for Marvel. So yeah, they should have just done that.
It's a nice comparison. This works, and you look at how much work and how much money DC spent, and how many failures there were. But there's still this one little bitty piece of it that maybe still works.
Right.
But look, good Lord, look what it took to get. Why didn't you just do that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a really good explanation for that. And I think it comes down to the business aspect of it. And that is they're looking at the numbers. They're looking at what's selling and what's working. And they're trying to increase that. And especially in this time now, everybody's looking at numbers and costs and stuff. But I think that's it. It's not looking at the brand and why it started. I've been involved in branding and naming things before, and what they are today, they have stepped away from that and gone with the gimmick, and it really hasn't made them as. It just kind of just stepped away from what their name was generated out of. I can't say who it is or what, because I'm not doing that, but it really did change on how that name was developed and its origin story, if you will. And they put in a new origin story, and it's like, but it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
I can think of several, actually. That fits for several brands when you really think about it.
Yeah. So you got to do your strategy and stick to it is really
authenticity.
Thank you.
It could be a whole other podcast topic in the ways that like DC's better at doing this than Marvel is, and Marvel's better at doing this than DC is. But you know, it's kind of like not shining a light on it, because like I said at the beginning, when Tony Stark was suddenly in Afghanistan and not the Korean War, they didn't shine a light on it. They just were like, oh, that's happened now. Then Nick Fury was in Vietnam. He wasn't in World War II. You know, that sort of thing. You know, they just sort of like casted that on. They didn't shine a light on and be like, we're rebooting the Marvel universe, and now Nick Fury's this and not that. They just sort of did it. And DC used to be able to be better than Marvel at doing that when they would introduce new characters under the mask. Like I said, Wally West was, you know, he was the Flash for the longest time. You know, Kyle Rayner was a lot of people's Green Lantern. You know, not Hal Jordan. You know, Hal Jordan's been dead for, you know, since the 90s. And then like you're able to kind of like move things on into these new tangents if you're, you know, if you do it well. But you know, all of comics has had, like, it's not just the New 52. Comics in general have had like terrible ideas recently. And again, it's why that direct to market thing direct to customer thing is working so well, because the big conglomerates don't seem to care that much anymore. Disney doesn't seem to care that much about Marvel Comics as a comics thing. They're more interested in the movies and what the TV shows and movies are doing. They don't really, AT&T does not give a crap about DC's printing. They don't care. They're about, they might be selling it. I've heard Robert Kirkman might be buying DC at some point. So
I know things that
DC
have changed over since the beginning of 2020 in ways that I never thought I'd see or read in a headline or an article about them. I mean, so much has gone away and people don't know it.
It akins back to that Marvel Reborn when Marvel went bankrupt. It was a weird time to be like, oh, like comics are dying. Like that's what it felt like when Marvel Reborn happened, because like the market is so saturated and brutal, and that really is the biggest problem with both companies, that they oversaturate now. They think, oh, the movies are popular, let's just shove everything onto the shelf and see if people buy it, and just get these garbage books written by nobody with no story to it, and nobody wants it. It's just paper. Like
I still say that live action NBC, the Peacock, did a much better job with John Constantine as a television series than the CW ever tried when putting him into Arrow,
right.
or whatever. The character, it was the same actor, but I love the I think it was like 12 episodes is all it was on NBC, and they kept jockeying it around because they couldn't like figure out like what time slot should this go in. Oh, this is too scary for 8 o'clock. Oh, he's playing with a cigarette lighter. We got to move that to 10. That kind of crap was going on. I think killed it, but how they did it, how it was produced and everything, I really did enjoy it. I thought that it was like, yeah, that's what I want, for John Constantine. Not to knock Keanu Reeves, but sorry, man, no, he's better.
Do a new film and cast Guy Pearce.
Yeah, Guy Pearce would be good.
Yeah, yeah. I just feel like that. Imagine what would happen if DC does what happens. They go bankrupt, right? What if Batman was owned by, I don't know, CBS? What if they bought it? What if NBC? What if Viacom bought, or Paramount? What if they bought Batman? Right. What would they do with it?
They put it on Paramount Plus.
I don't care who buys Batman, but cast Timothy Oliphant.
Oh yeah, Tim Oliphant. Yeah, Oliphantastic.
In another life, I'm a cast.
Oh, I know where you got that reference from.
Yeah.
What?
Oliphantastic. Yeah, he kind of got a bad rep when he was working with Kevin Smith on Live Free Die Hard. I think
really
that come from.
Yeah.
So but yeah, I think that seeing Elseworlds, we brought that up, and we are going to wrap up here, I promise. But Elseworlds is another good one that DC could have like really gone through with live action with cinematically. What if Batman had become a vampire? It's crazy stuff, right? It's just one-off stories.
Yeah, well, they seem to be doing that now with the rebooted Batman movie coming out, because that's not going to be within continuity with that. And you had Joker, that's not in continuity with any of the other stuff. So
I just read that the new Batman film is outside the continuity of any of the current Batman films.
Yeah.
So.
But we don't know what the storyline is, and it still looks like it's trying to rob it from Hush. But I mean, we know what
it's closer to Long Halloween from what I'm seeing. So that might be pretty. I think it looks pretty good. We'll see. I think they should just do things that are good. That's what the DC movies should do. They should just latch on to things that are good and just keep running. Because it's what Marvel did. Like, people forget early days of Marvel. Like, Ed Norton was Hulk. No one talks about that anymore. They just oh yeah, no, he's not. And then they got this other guy.
Who was Hulk? Who was Hulk before Ed Norton?
Yeah, exactly. Hulk, Eric Bana. Yeah. And
that last Hulk film was one of the last ones. Marvel Studios was just getting involved.
Yeah.
Well, Hulk is owned by Universal anyway. So it's not a Marvel property or Disney property.
But that's the reason that Incredible Hulk movie, that it didn't directly say that Hulk was canon, but it didn't erase it either, because it wasn't an origin story for Hulk in that movie. It was just, he was already the Hulk, and they kind of had like little things like, oh, he became the Hulk then, and they didn't make it a new Hulk movie because like that was so fresh. So
it was at the same time as Iron Man. I think it was in the same year. Like in 2008, you had Iron Man, you had Hulk, Bat Hulk with Ed Norton, and then you had The Dark Knight Returns.
Right.
And that was 2008 was like the year that obviously economically the world fell apart, but it was also the rebirth of comics and movies.
Yeah, absolutely. It turned them into blockbusters.
Yeah,
the X-Men movies proved that you could make a good comic book movie. Spider-Man, I think, is the one where Spider-Man was the one that made it a blockbuster. You could make your superhero movie could now not only be good, it could make you tons of money and become a franchise in the theater. And then that year, 2008, it became a whole new thing for movies. This idea of expanded universes for movies, like that's what Iron Man and Hulk became, and amazing that it's worked out as well as it has going forward. And I think a lot of that is because, as you said, they had a clear vision. They got a guy in there to stick with. Luckily, they stuck with the right guy, because they had another guy in there too, and that's a whole other story. And
I think we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and him and Feige were butting heads. So they gave him the TV stuff, and that's where all the Netflix stuff happened, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And that's why Feige never likes to reference any of that stuff, because he's ahead of that and he doesn't like it. So it's weird on what's in continuity when you really think about Marvel, but because Feige's so good at just keeping things moving forward, you don't notice it as much as DC, which seems to kind of flip back and forth. Like, well, Deadpool was successful, so let's re-edit Suicide Squad, and this was a thing, and it's just like, what? Like, it just make your movies. Like, make a movie and see if it works. I don't like.
I'm going to close. I'm going to say this and not say anything else because we've gone long.
Yeah, right.
That's okay. That's why it's called editing.
I've seen the new Suicide Squad trailer.
Right.
It's DC trying to ape Deadpool now.
Yeah, I mean,
that's all it is.
Yeah.
Only there's like 10 Deadpools in this movie.
Right. I mean, that's what Harley Quinn's become, is female Deadpool anyway. That's just all she is. Like she was actually an interesting, like, she was a goofy one-off character that became interesting with Mad Love, and now she's girl Deadpool, and it's like, okay, I don't care about this at all.
I watched that trailer and I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, he's doing Deadpool. She's doing Deadpool. Oh, he's doing Deadpool. They're all doing Deadpool.
I'm sort of excited because it's James Gunn, and
I love him.
I love James Gunn. I love the Guardians movies, so I'm going to give it a shot. And I think John Cena looks great in that movie. Like, I think he's like the best. He's like the best part of that movie, that trailer for me. His delivery was like spot on. But yeah, that's all I got to say about the branding of New 52. So yes.
Yeah.
How not to relaunch a brand.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said. I think to kind of sum this up, all right, is that, yeah, it was a great thing when it started. It had a purpose, it had vision, it had the strategy, and then the management as it went and all that, right? And it made money. But then after a while, it sort of became, it wore out its welcome, both with audiences and probably internally with some folks that were working on it that eventually just stepped away, or just kind of either they were working on, they were still there, they were just checked out because they were like given directives that just didn't make sense from the original vision and purpose in the first place. And all of those things happen. There's internal and external. When it comes to branding, you have to think internal and external. It's not just audience segment. That's all the marketing side. It's how you're communicating, how your culture is internally, because honestly, that is going to become external. You're going to be known for that, even though you don't mean to be. You can't be fake and say internally, we're all going to try to be a family and hate each other's guts, and then externally be like, we love each other. Like, no, it's going to come off because video is going to show like they gave each other a weird look. Did you all see that? He had knives in his eyes when he looked at that man. That stuff can happen. I mean, and again, I don't mean to keep picking on it, but when I looked at footage and video of the Marvel cast and how they interacted with each other, they seemed to genuinely like each other. When I look at DC and those characters, there's a couple that seemed a little, I don't know. Maybe not there. I think Marvel's had a couple of that. I think the guy that maybe played the speedster in their universe was, I don't know, he was exited pretty quickly. I mean, sometimes there's just not a fit for your culture, and but overall, it's important to mesh with each other internally very well to be successful as a brand and push that product out, because at the end of the day, people are buying products now because they like, it's not just the brand, like the logo, the look, or whatever. It's who's in charge. Like me, Mitch, and I, people like us. Thank you. We like that. Right. But, it's because they recognize us associated with NerdBrand. NerdBrand's just not some faceless entity. No entity, no brand is faceless anymore. It can't be. It won't make it in the new economy that is upon us now. Yeah. So that's something to consider. But anyways, Brandon, thank you for being on. We know you got a job you got to probably go back to. And so, but we appreciate you being on. You can check out Brandon Jones at Animation Destination on for his podcast. He talks about all things animation. It's a really cool podcast. Check it out. He also is a co-host or a host of Video Destruct with his friend Haas. We actually know Haas together, David Rocky. Can I say his name like that? I guess I can. I already did.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. So, but it's been great having you on, man. I hope that, we can have you on again sometime in the future. It's been a lot of fun, but we're going to let you go because I know you got places to be. So,
all right, guys.
But thanks everybody for tuning in, listening and watching. And remember, keep your nerd brand strong.